Hi, welcome to South Build TV. My name is Ryan, and I look to demystify the South Build process. In this episode, we're going to be talking to Jason, who's an expert in offsite construction. We're going to be talking about how offsite construction can save you time, money, and above all, carbon on your South Build. So if that might be of interest to you, please watch on.
Welcome to Self Build TV. We look to demystify the self-build process so you can learn to build your dream home without risk and stress that other self-builders face. Now back to Ryan.
So welcome back. As I said in introduction, we're going to be talking to Jason about offsite construction and how it can save you time, money, and effort, and above all, carbon. So firstly, Jason, welcome to the show. And could you give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself and your company, please?
Yeah, sure. I've been involved in offsite construction for over 30 years now, pretty much straight out of college. So I was involved in design of components, moved into the more commercial side, started a business manufacturing components that were heavily used in self-build, and grew that business very quickly. XL Structures was formed in 2008 to offer a range of different panelised systems to a number of markets, but particularly we do a lot of work in the self-build side of things.
Thanks for your introduction, Jason. I'm just going to quickly ask the audience, if they're new to the channel, please make sure you click on the link down below and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And also, I'm going to be asking Jason 5 questions, and then I'm going to be asking him his top 3 tips, and then ask how to find a little bit more about himself and his company. So let's kick off with question 1. So, I mean, it's probably obvious, but what is offsite construction? What are the sort of key elements of offsite construction?
Well, I suppose typically in this country, people think about construction methodology and all of that happening on a building site where it's wet and cold, and might be in a difficult position, might interrupt lots of other things going on around it. But offsite manufacture or offsite construction is exactly what it says. It takes a lot of those elements that would be typically done on a building site and moves it into a dry, secure, warm environment where you can pay much more attention to quality, and then you can manufacture components off-site, which are then brought to site to be assembled into whatever the structure is that you're trying to build.
Yeah, it's my understanding there's like a degree of offsite, because you can literally have a little bit and then you could literally deliver a whole house. Is there a particular range that you tend to stay in? Or,
well, as a business, we produce mostly two-dimensional panelised components, which would be typically flat packed on the back of a lorry. I don't want to draw a comparison necessarily with IKEA furniture, but it's the kind of flat pack approach to constructing a 3D structure on a building site. But there are other methods. There is a three-dimensional application of offsite where three-dimensional sections of buildings are made in a factory to a much greater extent, literally, even to the extent where furniture can be put into that module and then brought to site. And you just basically place all the chairs once you've bolted all the modules together. And that's very specific to certain applications. And in my experience is less applicable to self-build. The most common approach that I've come across is the panelised system. And that's really where we focus.
Okay, cool. So we're going to go move on to question 2, and we're going to talk a little bit about how does, I mean, obviously it's quite nice to be able to do it in the warmth, but how does it actually save you time and money using offsite construction?
Well, typically, because a lot of that work is being done off-site, when you actually get to the building methodology on site, or the building system, building sequence, it can happen much more quickly because you're not taking raw materials to a building site and then trying to assemble those into parts of a structure. That work has been done off-site. So anyone who's seen off-site building systems in action on a site is always struck by how quickly the structure can go up. And there's ways to take advantage of that when you're on the site. So the sequence of construction, the other following trades that you might have coming to site need to be scheduled in the right way to be able to take advantage of the fact that you're putting this structure up very quickly. And that's where you can really save a lot of time and also money because of the speed of construction on site.
Yeah, I was going to say, you touched on it earlier about the program. I mean, if you're doing bricky work, there's only certain weather conditions you can lay bricks in, concrete, etc. And doing everything off-site becomes a lot more predictable.
That's absolutely right.
And you can almost agree to the day when things are going to be delivered. And like most things, it's your risk reward as well is that you know exactly when things are going to be delivered, when it's going to be installed, etc. Rather than having to be hindered by the weather, and as I look outside, it's almost like a mild storm.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel sorry.
That's an excellent point. And getting a superstructure secure, and more importantly, probably in the dry very quickly, means that you can have trades working internally, and then the external facades can be working at the same time. And if the weather is horrendous, as we might be experiencing at the moment, then the outside facade is not necessarily on the critical path anymore. So work can continue again in that dry environment inside the building, quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean, normally it's a race to how quick can you be watertight, and being watertight is a great advantage, particularly in the UK weather. So I think that's one of the key takeaway points. Above all, just predictability, really. So we're going to move on to sort of question 3, and we touched on it in the title, and it's to do with carbon. And some people might not. How would you save carbon by adopting a offsite construction technology?
Well, there's a number of facets to that, really. There's an element surrounding the type of materials that are used. There's an element surrounding how you build the building on site, and there's an element surrounding the impact of running that building over the course of its lifetime. So 3 really quite major contributors. The types of material, the benefits of using offsite can range from using a more lightweight structure that might save on, say, the amount of concrete you've got in the ground, and concrete being not perhaps so environmentally friendly as some of the other materials that you might use. So any saving on a site of that kind of material is a good idea. The actual material you construct the superstructure from as well can have a big impact. I think it's pretty well known that timber is extremely sustainable, extremely environmentally friendly, and certainly all of the timber materials that we use in our superstructures. And I know most of the mainstream timber-based production companies are using timber from sustainable sources. So when trees grow, particularly when they're younger and they're fast growing, they absorb an awful lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they give off oxygen. So that's the first positive thing about a piece of timber. When you cut that tree down, you will plant at least one more, and in some cases 2. And that's really about sustainable forestry and making sure that resource, that natural resource, is maintained for the future. So by using more timber, we're encouraging that cycle and having a fairly big impact on carbon dioxide emissions.
Yeah, I mean, it goes with a little, as you say, we touched on carbon, but then as you say, with renewing or renewables and renewing it as a material, it's constantly being replenished. Whereas there are materials out there, particularly plastics, etc., aren't in its raw form. You can't really renew it without obviously recycling it. But there's always a degree of the resources is limited eventually, and you have it. So it's a win-win situation when you're using wood as your main source. It is renewable, and also it sucks up the carbon and embeds.
That's right. I mean, if you watch the news a lot, they talk about slash and burn type approaches in certain countries where they're ripping down tropical hardwood forests in Central America, for example, in the Amazon, to put in agriculture. Now that is not environmentally sustainable. But the type of timber that we use doesn't come from the Amazon. The type of timber that we use comes from sustainable forests, mostly in the northern hemisphere, which is extremely sustainable. And those forest areas are growing the more timber is used in construction. So it's an absolute no-brainer to just keep using timber as much as you can. The process on site as well, you can vastly reduce the amount of waste that you create on a building site by using an offsite system. And that waste generally goes to landfill or has to be disposed of in some way. So that creates more movements of vehicles, which are giving off carbon dioxide into the atmosphere through just fumes of burning fossil fuels, and less deliveries to the site potentially because you're bringing a more complete component to the site. Less disruption, less noise for the residents. There's an awful lot of aspects of the site process that is impacting on the environment, and in particular the carbon footprint, if you like, of that operation. And then I think finally, we're being asked all the time to build better insulated buildings, more airtight buildings, and the reason for that is to reduce the requirement for space heating. So if the requirement for space heating is reduced in a dwelling, then you're not necessarily burning fossil fuel in the form of gas to heat that area. So that's another aspect of off-site construction, is that they are generally extremely well insulated, and you can design them so that the building fabric is at various levels of performance in terms of heat loss, therefore reducing the amount of fossil fuels you need to burn to heat that space, and also, of course, reducing fuel bills, which is an added bonus and important to everybody as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key things and one of the main reasons buildings use a lot of energy is poor construction, but also you need to manage those cold bridges and how things interact with each other. Doing that offsite, obviously, you're not reinventing the wheel every single time, and you're monitoring it. I mean, I think one of the things you touched on earlier as well is about the waste, and one of the sort of hidden costs in South Build is skip hire, and having a huge skip outside your site, filling it up with stuff you've literally paid for that's not being used, and you've also paying for it to be removed. So it's kind of a double whammy, and it's unfortunate how much you actually see get taken away from some sites if it's not handled correctly.
No, that's right.
So any of that would be much more acceptable on a site. You can always tell a good site on how clean it is as well.
Absolutely.
So and generally, we're going to move on to question 4, and this is a sort of question I ask about when something's not feasible. So, for example, in this situation, when would off-site construction not be feasible in your eyes?
We get quite a lot of inquiries for extensions. I think particularly in the last year, people have been at home a lot. I've been looking at their homes and thinking, right, we're going to extend, or we're going to do this and the other. And we certainly have built extensions using pre-designed, prefabricated, panelised systems, so it can work. But there are certain situations where, perhaps because of the size of the proposed extension, or because of the way that it connects with the existing building, that makes it less feasible. So we very often will look at those kind of designs straight away and just advise people that this probably isn't the right solution. You can still use sustainable materials in constructing it, but perhaps pre-designing it and trying to manufacture it off-site is not the most cost-effective solution. So we often have that conversation with people very early on.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously again marrying the new with the old. It's hard for you to do that from remotely, if that makes sense. So yeah, it does make sense. It wouldn't be feasible. So if we move on to question 5, and how I sort of explain it is, if someone wanted to go down the route of doing some off-site construction, what sort of information do potential self-builders need to have to actually get that ball rolling?
Well, that's an interesting one. I mean, we meet lots of self-builders, and their journeys are very different in many cases. So there's an awful lot of information around at the moment in that sector, and there's a lot of shows that you can go to and talk to lots of suppliers and lots of experts, and gather as much information as you can really about about the process and about the options that are available to you, and there are an awful lot. So I think it's great if you can find a kind of a critical friend in that process who can advise you. And there are some great architects who are well versed in self build, great project managers who can help you. And certainly, if you decide to go for a package like the kind of package that we provide, package companies generally are keen to help you from a very early stage, because whilst it's going to help the self builder to understand the process, it very much helps the company, the package company, who can deliver that process for you in a sort of seamless and efficient way. So do your research, try and find the right partners to work with through the process. And probably before you find the right partners, you need to understand your own skill set and your own capability and your own desires in terms of how much do you want to be involved, how much time have you got, do you want to, as we sometimes see, physically get involved in the construction of every element? Do you want to do some parts of it yourself? Do you not want to do any of it yourself? Would you rather just give it to someone and say that go and build me that house and I'll come and move in however many months that might be? So really understanding your own capability and time availability, all really important.
Yeah, I think one thing we haven't really touched on is that with your team is that you don't just do one system, you do a varied array of systems, where some people would literally just have one and try and shoehorn you in. And the advantage of yourselves is that you have multiple things and you try and tailor that to the sort of client's aspirations, or the self builder's aspirations.
That's exactly right. Our approach is a little bit different. So we have a really fantastic supply chain who are able to manufacture the components that we need across a range of different types of construction. And equally, we have a design team who are well versed in a number of different types of construction. So whether it be a CLT panel, a light gauge steel panel, or SIPs, or a timber frame panel, we can deliver a project that encompasses those different types of panelized construction. The benefit of that is they've all got lots of advantages. Every project is potentially different in terms of the physical design of it, the performance that's required, the client's wants and needs for that particular project. So we very much have an approach that not, one size does not necessarily fit all. So having that palette of solutions is really quite powerful to make sure that clients get the right technical solution and the right commercial solution for their particular project.
Yeah, I mean, I say that quite a few times in self build. Unfortunately, there is not one silver bullet, but at the same time, fortunately, is that you're building a home that is tailored to your needs, wants, and family's needs, not just now, but into the future. So that it's kind of a two-edged sword, really, on that front. Sort of like you're getting something that you can get something that is completely tailored to you, and that's why it's important to go through that process. Because if you don't go through that process, unfortunately, on the other side is that you can get something that wouldn't be suitable for you. So it's important to have that sort of, as you said, do the research, make sure you get that sort of introduction early on. And what comes up a lot is the to do it earlier than later, if that makes sense. So it's normally what we tend to find.
It's really it's a multifaceted approach, and I think the other thing that's worth saying is that everybody has a budget, whether it's a generous budget or it's a tight budget, and they all want to spend that in different ways. Some will want to future-proof their home as much as possible, and invest in the building fabric to reduce heat loss, etc. And others, may not be so important to them. Obviously, we kind of encourage that, if I'm honest, but others will want to, have a great kitchen or some other aspect of the build. So how they spend their budget is really dependent on their own preferences to a certain degree. And I think we're often asked the question, how should we design our house so that it suits, your types of building system? And I think, as you just said, the reality of it is, if you're going to build your own house, you need something that is going to suit the needs of yourself, your family, whatever your needs are. So I always advise people that is the starting point. And then once you've got that in basic terms, let us have a look at it, and we can then perhaps offer some guidance about how you might slightly amend the structure to use this type of construction efficiently, but still deliver the needs that you have as a family or whatever as a self builder.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly not. That's the advantage is that a lot of self builders only build one, maybe two homes in their lifetime, if they, maybe three if someone's very enthusiastic. Obviously, architects, people like yourself, other experts, it's their day job, and they'll not say churn through a load, but relatively throughout their career, they'll picking their brains can be a life. I wouldn't say not lifesaver, but there'll be things that you never have thought of if out of the wildest dreams sort of thing, and that's why it's always good to work with the right team around you to get you that sort of information. So we're going to come to the end of those sort of 5 quick questions. We're going to move on to your top 3 tips that you have for self builders.
Wow. That's a tricky one. I guess the first thing, and one of the biggest conversations we have all the time, is land and about finding land, and that is a big challenge, no doubt, for everybody. And I would say, be open-minded. You need to spend some time trying to find the right piece of land, and don't just rely on a plot search or an agency perhaps to bring you plots. Go out and find them, and there are lots of opportunities that perhaps sit around if you're willing to go and try and dig them out. So that's probably the first thing. I think it's really important, secondly, to understand how you want to approach it, and be realistic about your own abilities and time that you can invest. So that's really important. Be honest with yourself about that. And then I think, as you said, try and make sure you get the right team around you. And these should be people that will take the time to understand what you're trying to achieve as a self builder, and then offer you guidance and assistance to deliver that, rather than just tell you this is how you should be doing it. So I think that's probably my 3 top tips for self builders.
Well, Jason, thank you very much for your top 3 tips. That I'm sure our audience would find them very useful, and your 5 questions. If they want to know a little bit more about yourself and find a bit more information about your company, what would be the best place to go?
Yeah, just hop onto our website and have a look at what we're doing there. We're trying to update that constantly, so we'll be adding newsletters and some case studies, as well as the general information there. So that's excelstructures.co.uk.
Excellent. Again, thank you for your time today, and I hope the audience found it very useful. If you have any questions, please always feel free to pass them on to myself, and I can pass them on to Jason, and he'll be more than happy to answer them. And if he can't, at least we'll be able to point you in the right direction. And thank you for taking the time to check out this episode, and I hope to be coming along on your self-build journey. Thank you.